So welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And this week's video is called The Boring Middle Way. I'm obviously not very in tune with video titles to try and get views. It's not a particularly great title for the video, but I think it does capture what it is that I wanted to talk about this week, which is that often on the path to recovery, we can be tempted towards particular extremes. And in many ways, my book is not a very helpful example of that, because on my path to recovery, one of the things that in hindsight I can look back and I would have done differently was this sense of becoming very kind of extreme and rigid and kind of somewhat overcommitted in terms of the intensity with which I was pursuing certain paths and treatments that I was doing. It's like getting well literally became my life. It became a total obsession. And in some ways that was helpful because it was what I needed to break away from this place that I'd been in previously, where I was just kind of waiting for this thing to happen and there wasn't enough active commitment and engagement in the process. But after a while, it was its own source of stress and anxiety, the kind of obsessive nature with which I was pursuing recovery. And if I'm honest, what gave me the title for this video, and I always deliberately steer well clear of politics when doing anything like this, but it's just interesting at this point in time that at the point of doing this, we're an hour or two away from a vote of no confidence of the Prime Minister here in the UK in Parliament. And you've got a lot of opposing views. You've got some extreme views, you've got some kind of middle views, and that kind of fragmentation that we see here in the UK, you also see particularly in US politics and also around Europe. And it got me thinking about the impact that you have, obviously in society, when you've got people pulling in lots of different directions and the lack of cohesion that you have. But actually in the context of this video, what it got me thinking about was actually what happens within us when on the recovery path, we have all these different extremes in that we feel like we need to be absolutely committed to using all the tools and techniques all of the time, be in a healing state, take all our supplements, like total commitment. And then at the same time, we have this kind of opposing force where we feel like we need to be in a healing state and we need to be accepting and we need to be allowing and we need to kind of go with the flow and follow our intuition. I did a separate video on the C word and the S word, but how do those things coexist together? Other examples might be using our intuition, like listening to our kind of inner guidance versus also listening to logic and our intellect and kind of our rational perspective. The place where we've become very rigorous around pacing and really carefully measuring our activity levels versus the place where actually that can cause its own set of anxieties and fear, and we need to let go of that kind of measurement. And this piece is not a comment on politics, but it's a comment on the healing path, that often there is a somewhat boring, practical, sensible, considered middle way where at different times, like the pendulum might need to swing up here, and if the pendulum's up here, it may need to then swing back up here to then find that point of balance. So it may be that we're not always in a kind of centered path. But ultimately, we need to have that integration of those different capacities and different qualities. And it's true to say that at different stages of recovery, different things are important. For different people with different subtypes, different systems being affected, again, different things are important. But what we can also tend to do is we tend to get super fired up about all this stuff that we're going to do, and then we kind of leap in overcommitted, and then it becomes not sustainable. And so really what I'm talking about is this boring middle way, like a kind of sensible, considered approach. We're not trying to change everything at once. We're being kind of scientific of trying something and trying something else and getting feedback and testing that. Often it's the more effective path forwards. And if we're someone that can get very kind of emotionally excited and kind of passionate, and like we've got all of these ideas of the stuff that we're going to do and how it's going to happen, and we want to kind of add bells and whistles and all that kind of stuff, it can feel quite sobering and quite challenging actually to just go, what I feel emotionally drawn towards might be all of these things, but actually what's going to be most helpful for the recovery path is going to be, ABC or XYZ or whatever. It's a little bit like somebody who has a problem with debt, and to get out of debt they want to go and hire an amazing financial planner, they want to go and do a training course on investing, and they want to kind of read loads of books around money, and they kind of want to go and study simple living and kind of go. So it's all this kind of excitement, all this stuff, and it feels like that's what's going to make this boring problem more exciting. But actually all of that stuff ends up costing money and ends up being an avoidance of dealing with what needs to be dealt with. And sometimes making deep and lasting change in life is not as sexy and not as exciting as we might think it might be. And often the building blocks of a great life, and this is not just true in terms of recovery from ME chronic fatigue, it's true of a great relationship, it's true of a great career, or of great friendship. Often the building blocks is doing things which are tedious and sometimes boring, but doing them with heart and care and attention to detail and a sense of kind of love and joy in the process. And it's an interesting thing looking at different careers. For example, people look at our 7-year-old daughter wants to be a pop star like Katy Perry. I'm not that confident. She's not a particularly great singer or dancer, but nonetheless, that's a dream. And one looks at that life and they see, she went and saw Katy Perry at the O2 back in the summer, which is probably not appropriate for a 7-year-old, but anyway. And then of course she sees that kind of 2 hours on stage in front of 20,000 people. It's like, oh my God, like that must be like the most amazing thing to do. But actually, when you're a pop star on the road, you're spending most of the time traveling. And yes, if you're super successful, then you're traveling perhaps in a private jet or whatever. But nonetheless, the kind of the adventure of that gets tiring and boring very, very quickly, one would imagine. And I think that's true of lots of careers that people look at and go, oh my God, that must be the most amazing thing. And then you actually look at the life that person lives. And of course, there are those moments which are magical. But a lot of the time, it's tedious stuff, it's boring stuff, it's repetitive stuff, it's stuff that requires attention to detail. And cultivating our ability to bring attention, to bring heart, to bring consideration, to bring care to those things, even when it's not exciting, it's not an adventure, it's not full of emotion, it's not full of connection, that can be one of the most valuable and important lessons for the recovery path, because many of the things which are most useful for recovery are tedious and boring and repetitive. And that doesn't mean that because those things are that way that you can't find fun and find joy in those, but it's that ability to stay consistent along the path. And there may be some that are watching this and going, Alex, that's my life. I already do that. You're preaching to the choir, and if so, then that's great. Maybe others, and I see a few comments. Pamela saying that's me leaping in, and certainly that was how it was for me. That in the sense that I wanted to make it more exciting and add more adventure to it, and would often therefore set goals that were unsustainable because it was like the idea of going for a 10-minute walk each day was really uninteresting, but the idea of going for a 20-minute run was much more appealing. So I would push towards the 20-minute run when I couldn't do the 10-minute walk. So this kind of middle way, which can be boring, can be tedious, but it can ultimately be where the change is. And the thing that I've certainly learned in my life is that when I can master the tedious stuff, the boring stuff, and pay attention, often the really amazing stuff is then built from that. Like the things that I love to do for example, my optimal health clinic life, like seeing patients or speaking at kind of workshops or practitioner training program, that's only possible because of all these other pieces of mechanics in the machine that have to happen to make sure that everything's working and flowing. And the more those other things are taken care of, the more that thing, which is the pinnacle thing, which I love to do, the more that's possible and the more sustainable that becomes. Same is true in recovery. If you can nail the tedious stuff, the boring stuff, then the stuff in life you really want to do actually starts to happen and you actually start to enjoy it because you've got that solid foundation that's underneath it. So the reflection here is, what's your attitude to the boring middle way? What are some things that perhaps you're avoiding doing because they don't feel exciting, that actually if you did them would give more solid foundation and more sustainability to the recovery process for you? So I hope that's useful. I think there'll be a Facebook Live next week. And if there is, I'll probably do something around handling Christmas. Handling Christmas can be its own set of challenges for a lot of people with family, and particularly if you're limited in terms of energy. Please share your comments and thoughts. Use each other in the kind of comment section to perhaps share where your challenges are. I'm sure if you're having challenges around this middle way, you're probably not the only one, and it helps often to learn from each other. So I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to talking with you hopefully next week. Bye-bye for now.